Mainstream media gives you the impression that there is nothing good about America. In direct contrast to that, my podcasts will prove by examples that America has always been and still is the land of opportunity for everyone. Welcome to another episode of Life Lessons with Dr. Bob. My guest today is James O'Keefe, who is the founder, CEO, and chairman of Project Veritas. This is his second appearance on Life Lessons with Dr. Bob, and if you haven't already done so, you can watch his first interview, which is episode 11, that was recorded just about a year ago. James and Project Veritas have been very busy in the past year, so I've invited him back to tell us what they've accomplished in that time. First, a brief introduction to those of you who don't already know who James is. He's an investigative journalist, but in the 430,000 words that Wikipedia uses on their page, they don't refer to him that way, even once. Instead, Wikipedia uses the disparaging term provocateur. That sounds like a French word, and since I failed French in high school, I had to look it up. The definition of provocateur is, quote, a person who associates with suspected persons who pretends to have sympathy with their aims and incites them to perform or say something incriminating. Indeed, James does act as a provocateur in his role as an investigative journalist. But in addition to being an investigative journalist, he is also an entrepreneur. Over the past 11 years, he has built a large and successful enterprise called Project Veritas, which we'll also refer to as PV. And for those of you who don't know Latin, Veritas means truth. The organization is staffed with people that he trains to use undercover methods, primarily hidden cameras and microphones, to achieve PV's mission, which is to achieve a more ethical and transparent society by investigating and exposing corruption, dishonesty, waste, and other misconduct in both public and private institutions. Now let's get into it. James, welcome to the show.
Dr. Bob, that was quite an introduction again. Thank you.
First, give us an update on some important events that we discussed last year. The first one is the FBI's break-in at your home late last year, supposedly to investigate details of the Ashley Biden diary.
Yes, quite a few updates there. This is about a year ago, almost to the day. I'm sitting here as of this filming. It was a year ago this coming week that the FBI came to my home with a search warrant, a raid against me in my apartment regarding Ashley Biden's diary. For those of you who don't recall, this was a story involving a source sent us the diary belonging to the president's daughter named Ashley. Mm-hmm. In this diary, it alleged that inappropriate things were done. I felt I couldn't authenticate the document. I tried to. I thought that I didn't, but apparently I was a better journalist than I thought I was, Dr. Bob, because it turned out to be real. In August of this year, the sources sources pled guilty to stealing this document. But journalists have a right to receive information even if that information was stolen, so long as the journalist played no part in the theft.
But I thought they had found it in an apartment that she had vacated. That's not the case?
Correct. Well, perhaps they pled guilty to something they didn't do.
Right.
Because sometimes people do that.
Understood.
And there was
because the story they told you, as I recall, was that, and they came to you because you're known to make use of these kinds of things and to investigate. But they alleged, from what I understood, they said they found it in an apartment that she had vacated.
Correct. Like a halfway house. She was in drug rehab. So it's it looked to us, and based upon the New York Times reporting, that this wasn't stolen. It was abandoned. Mm-hmm. But even if it was,
you have the right
journalists have a right to publish stolen material. We joke, our lawyers joke that, you know what it's called at the Washington Post or the New York Times when they transport stolen documents across state lines? That's called Tuesday. So
Right,
on the
right,
warrant,
right.
when the FBI came to my house, it said transportation of stolen material across the lines. Well, that's what journalists do.
Besides, did you transport it over state lines?
Right. That journalist, well, the email
I see,
document
yeah.
is the same interstate. So it was absurd. So you asked a question, what's happened since then? Well, a lot of things have happened. I mean, first of all, the federal judge in New York assigned what's called a special master. It was the same thing they assigned in the Trump raid, which is a retired judge to run interference with this taint team at the FBI. And in this special master motion, it's a big deal to get appointed a special master in a case like this. By the way, I haven't been charged with anything, and it's been a year. It's been 2 years since we learned about the diary, and the statute of limitation is 5 years. So when this happened, they appointed a special master, and the U.S. attorneys, the prosecutors, argued before the federal judge that I wasn't a journalist because the Attorney General of the United States, Merrick Garland, issued a memo in July of 21, right before the raid against me, saying you can't do this to journalists. This week, 3 days before this filming, Attorney General Merrick Garland issued another memo forcefully stating that they will not be seizing any reporters' notebooks or engage in raids, which led to a New York Times article 2 days ago bringing up Project Veritas, saying, well, does this make the raid against Project Veritas illegal? In fact, Dr. Bob, the ACLU, the American Civil Liberties Union, and this should probably shock you, came to Project Veritas's defense.
Not a right-wing organization, I might add.
Very, very, very much left-leaning. But as it pertains to the First Amendment, there are many lawyers at the ACLU who thought that what they did to us was wrong because they see that, for example, it could be done to them under a Republican administration. So what happened was...
But you can't even argue the case because they haven't brought a case against you.
There's no case, exactly.
No case.
All it is a search warrant right now. It's called an in-re search warrant are the pleadings. So what happened was they assigned a special master. The Fed said they're not journalists because they deal in undercover tapings and journalists don't do that. The federal judge overruled the FBI and said, you got to stop going through O'Keefe's phones. There needs to be a retired judge to handle this. And it's basically sat in limbo since.
But they should return the phones to you.
We
in
have
any
filed
records.
a motion it's called a Rule 41G motion under the Federal Rules of Criminal Procedure to get our stuff back, return of property. And in this extraordinary 50-page pleading, we make a sweeping constitutional argument that this raid was unconstitutional and illegal per the Privacy Protection Act, per Merrick Garland's own order. See, if you're going to raid CNN or the New York Times, which has never happened before, you need permission from the Attorney General of the United States per the laws of the land.
I think the raid on Trump required that, right?
I don't know.
Okay.
I just know the laws pertaining to the press.
Yes.
Now, the feds would argue that I don't have press protections, but this new memo by Garland states that even in cases where it's murky, you still need permission from the assistant, the person that works for Garland. So the question...
And they didn't have that for your raid.
Not only that, just this week in Garland's updated filings, he had to answer a question, how many of these raids have you authorized? He said 0.
0. So this was not authorized.
So the $64,000 question is, did Merrick Garland authorize the raid? And maybe, and some are speculating, again, there's a New York Times article, which by the way was quite fair towards us this week. Some are speculating that maybe Garland issued this memo as a result of the raid against Project Veritas. So we don't know the answer to these questions. What we do know is, Dr. Bob, right now on the federal judge's desk in New York lies a motion to return my stuff and declare, in part, this whole thing to be unconstitutional. Federal judges can take a long time to rule on that. I would hesitate to be her right now because she's in a tough position. But she did rule against them once, and this is a case of enormous constitutional implications.
And at least no charges have been filed against you.
None.
Great. Okay. All right. And what has happened to the diary? What's happening to it?
It was published online by some lesser-known entity. I don't know how they got it. It was apparently a couple reporters and sources knew about this document. I thought it may have been a forgery. Even if it was real, I was concerned that the contents of the diary didn't happen. Again, the Biden children are quite troubled. Hunter Biden, these are troubled kids. And, people write things, and I didn't know if it happened. And I felt I didn't want to blow up Project Veritas. I didn't want to publish something that was fake. So I chose not to publish it. And I got some heat from people in the conservative movement. Well, why didn't you hurt Biden? I said, well, that's not really what I do. I want to make sure it's legitimate. And that's what happened. And so I don't know if you want to move on from that, but that's basically a summary of the FBI situation.
Understood.
It is terrifying, though, when the feds do this to you. And
it's not like they called you or called your attorney and said, please appear or this and that. They came when?
The laws say they're supposed to do that. The laws say, to quote the statute, negotiate with the attorneys for the affected members of the media. They didn't do that. They came with a battering ram. There's no need. I mean, you have to understand, for the FBI to execute a search warrant, I'm talking about guns and battering ram. I don't think they did the battering ram to Trump.
Guns were at the ready. They
had guns. They had handcuffs. They put me in handcuffs. They had a big black, like the Vikings do against.
I get it. I've seen it.
And this is a very aggressive thing. There's no need for this.
They put you in handcuffs.
They put me in handcuffs, and in my apartment, and they ransacked the apartment for 2 hours. So there's no need for that. Now, what they also did, and this is important. This is an update. I forgot about this. This is a very big update. In March, after you interviewed me last, we found out that prior to that raid, this is going back to November of 2020 now, that's a year before the raid, the federal government, the Department of Justice, executed secret subpoenas, secret 2704 subpoenas, which is they went to the email provider, Microsoft, that houses our emails. They went to sales like Uber, Salesforce, Google, Apple, and they got granted subpoenas by magistrate judges. Judges signed that secret warrant to go get my emails from these companies. And they gagged the companies from saying anything about it. This is an extraordinary thing. That means that Microsoft Corporation handed over 200,000 of my emails and my reporters' emails. Do you know what's in our emails? Source information, donor information, although we're careful sometimes not to put the name of the people, but it's the principle of the matter. And they gagged Microsoft. Now, how do we know about this? Because after the raid, they continued to gag Microsoft. And one brave lawyer from Microsoft was like, hold up. You're taking journalists' emails and you're gagging us from telling anybody about it? Well, this is now a public case. Why are you gagging us? Microsoft drafted a motion opposing these prosecutors. And the moment Microsoft pushed back, the feds folded and it became public information. They went to 8 magistrate judges in New York, the Southern District of New York, and got granted these subpoenas, which means, Dr. Bob, the feds have all my emails, texts, photos, and that of my team going back 2 years. Unbelievable. Unbelievable. And
on what pretext did they get those warrants?
Exactly. We don't know, because they sealed the affidavit. Recall in Trump's case, they released the affidavit. It was redacted. They sealed the affidavit. The affidavit, for those of you who are not familiar with the federal rules of criminal procedure, in order to get a warrant, you have to have a sworn affidavit that contains probable cause.
Right.
The executive branch of government goes to the judicial branch, that is to say a federal judge, magistrate judge, and the judge has to have oversight. Okay, there is sufficient probable cause
to issue this warrant.
But we don't know what the probable cause was.
There was no probable cause.
And the law says, the Attorney General Merrick Garland says in his memo, which he released this week, a second memo, you have to show the public the probable cause if you're going to raid a journalist. It's self-evident, because society's interest in the journalist not giving up his source material supersedes whatever marginal interest the government has in raiding a journalist. So this is a this is the most serious constitutional case perhaps in American history. That's quite a statement. Here's why. Because the moment the feds cross that Rubicon with guns drawn, and they take these phones, they took 2 of my iPhones, and they take all the information on the phone, there is no amount of restitution they can give me to make me whole. They couldn't give me $10 billion, it wouldn't make me whole, because the sources in the government that came to me.
That's your livelihood. Yeah.
That's the country's livelihood.
The trust.
That's the public's right to know. That's what the First Amendment's all about.
So do you have a suit against the government regarding their getting those subpoenas for your records a year before?
I don't.
And it was probably a year before you even got the diary, so it's not tied to the diary.
Well, I
was it?
testified before members of the Oversight Committee back in March in D.C. about this matter, but we currently have a motion before a federal judge. So if I were to file a lawsuit right now, it would be stayed pending the outcome of that motion. Right. You know how these people on the federal government
But just clarify this. When they were going the record for your records at Uber and Microsoft or whatever, that was probably, was it before you had received the diary?
This was, okay, good question. The diary, we received the diary on around September 2020. This is 2 months before Biden versus Trump. And then we made the decision not to publish a diary in October, but I did reach out to Biden for comment, as any journalist should.
Right.
I reached out to the daughter and Joe Biden. We reached out to them. The email that we sent, the letter that we sent saying, hey, we would like your comment. We reserve the right to publish this. We want to know what we think. That was forwarded to the FBI by Biden's lawyer. They forwarded my request for comment to the federal government, said, prosecute these guys. In fact, I know that because they accidentally, you can't make this stuff up, accidentally CC'd one of my attorneys because we had sent the memo. And it says, forward this to SDNY. Roberta Kaplan, the lawyer for Ashley Biden, was somehow related to one of the federal prosecutors and said, you got to go after these guys. Within 2 weeks of that happening, that's when they got the secret subpoenas.
I see.
So
Right,
our theory is, and this is a theory, that 2 week period of time, there was enough time for them to go up to the Attorney General of the United States, that perhaps they did this on their own. We don't know, but we need to know.
Well, it is probably related to the diary situation.
You know what? They're going to haul these people before members of Congress.
Well,
and
that's
ask
if we
them.
win the House, if the Republicans win the
You know,
House.
I think this is a bipartisan issue, but I hope that they haul them before Congress.
Very complicated and very scary. Now, there's a recent ruling against Project Veritas that I read about in the New York Times. Tell us about that suit and the status.
So that was the Democracy Partners videos in 2016 involving Bob Creamer. There's a big story. It was mentioned in the presidential debate between Trump and Hillary. And they were these videos of these Democratic operatives inciting violence at Trump rallies.
Oh, I remember that.
A guy named Scott Fovel worked with Bob Creamer, and he goes, we have mentally ill people that we pay to go to rallies and beat people up. So what they were doing is bird dogging. They were going to these rallies, and they would touch people on the shoulder, and they'd fall down, and then they'd blame it on the Trump rally.
On right-wing extremists.
Right. And this was a massive story. Fovel was fired for what he said.
And these are videos that you recorded.
Hidden videos. Yeah. Quite an elaborate investigation. We had a young woman who pretended to be a niece of a donor. The donor actually gave money to this group, this Americans United for Change. So these videos were a sensation. I mean, this was unbelievable. I mean, it was mentioned by Trump in the debate in front of 80 million people. And it made the New York Times, it made CNN. Anderson Cooper actually admonished the behavior. And so then we get sued. But we didn't get sued for defamation. We didn't get sued for lying about it. No, we got sued for, get this, breach of fiduciary duty and something called misrepresentation, which is a tort, which is a civil action. It's a tortious interference issue. And we don't settle. We go all the way. 6 years later, it goes to a jury trial. That's last month.
So wait a minute. That organization where you did some secret recordings sued Project Veritas, claiming that you were...
A couple things. Trespass, fraudulent misrepresentation, wiretapping, which is absurd because the District of Columbia is a one-party consent state, and there's no wiretapping. It's not like we bugged wires and planted devices. We were talking to people and recording those interactions, and something called a breach of fiduciary duty. So what's interesting about that, this is very technical, but we're getting into it. Sometimes you got to get into the weeds to understand how these things work. They probably thought they could break my will and get me to fold and surrender, but I don't really settle lawsuits, Dr. Bob, and you know that.
Same.
And I love being deposed like you do because I got nothing to hide. They have everything to hide. So we go through the depositions. On summary judgment, which means at the end of the discovery process, the judge rules. The judge ruled that there's no trespass here, and they got rid of one of the other torts. And there were two left: breach of fiduciary duty and misrepresentation.
What fiduciary duty does a reporter have to the people he or she is interviewing?
Great rhetorical question. That's why we go to trial, because it's so absurd. But there's something that I didn't think about when I went to trial. It's Washington, D.C. And in Washington, D.C., the jury pool is probably not a jury of your peers.
Never is.
I don't quite know. And again, I want to make sure that you ask me specific questions, because I could literally write a book about what happened next. But the short story is, I've been to 2 federal jury trials in 3 years, civil. I won the last one on a directed verdict, meaning the judge dismissed it before the jury could issue a verdict. So I was very confident on this. But the jury pool in D.C., the way it works, and it's important your audience know the specifics. Voir dire is Latin for jury selection. 40 jurors go into a room, right? And the judge says, do you think it could be fair in this case? Have you ever heard of James O'Keefe? If the case involved journalism, undercover, are you biased against that? He asks all these questions. And the jury has to respond yes to some of them if they think they can't be fair. And then when they respond yes, the judge brings each of these 40 people up to the witness stand and says, what did you mean when you said you've heard of James O'Keefe? 20 out of those 40, it's called a jury pool, 20 were struck for prejudice because they admitted in under oath that they could not be fair. My lawyer said they never seen anything like that before. Now you're left with 20 who say that they can be fair. But the interesting thing about that was, when some of those jurors went up to the microphone, it was kind of like James Clapper lying under oath. They were like, no, I've never heard of Project Veritas before. I don't know who that O'Keefe guy is. It was so obvious.
But can't you claim because 20 of the 40 agreed that they couldn't, or they stated they couldn't be unbiased?
They have to say it under oath.
Well, 20 of the 40 did.
Yes, they did.
So doesn't that mean the whole jury pool is tainted?
And this is a 2-day process. Meanwhile, you're sitting in a sensory deprivation chamber. There's no light. You got the judge. You got the courtroom. It's spiritually.
And your lawyers can't ask questions.
Yes, I can get more specific. The lawyers on each side, plaintiff and defendant. I'm the defendant. They can cross-examine the juror, kind of like a witness. They But didn't you work for American Federation of Teachers? One of these guys worked for the DNC, was a field rep, and he's like, "Oh, I've never heard of O'Keefe. I don't know who that guy is." It was so odd that my lawyer was cross-examining. So you've never heard of them, huh? And then this one juror said, "There's transcripts to this, by the way. I'm not making this up. This is all transcribed. There's no cameras in federal courtrooms, but he goes, yeah, I used to use hidden cameras when I was tracking Republican candidates, but I think what O'Keefe does is unethical." And my lawyer was like, are you kidding me? Are you kidding me? And this guy actually wasn't struck.
But doesn't your lawyer have the right to object or to dismiss a certain number?
Our lawyer has a right to
dismiss some of them, right?
Right. So here, how it works is the judge has to make a determination for cause, and then you're left with these remaining jurors.
Yes.
And then each side has 5 preemptory strikes.
Right, I understand.
And you can strike them for any reason.
Any reason, right.
So you go back into the room, and it's fascinating. Like, it is quite ironic that I become learned in the art of jury selection. I'm a journalist. And you have these note cards, and you strategize which of these jurors do you want to keep and which do you want to let go. What's interesting, Dr. Bob, is there were a number of African Americans on this jury who liked us. They were fans of us. They didn't say they couldn't be biased. They were asked, could you be biased? No, I think I can be fair. And they struck those black jurors who were fans of us. Because God forbid we have African American people who think differently than we do.
Or who also are cautious about the American government.
Correct. God forbid that. We wouldn't want people to be rational.
Right.
So we struck 5, they struck 5, and there was our 10 left, and we needed 9. In civil court, it's 9, in criminal court, it's 12.
I see.
And then we had our 9 jurors. We later did some, and this, you're allowed to do this, it's legal. I think we're hiring a consultant and finding out more about that jury pool. I believe every single one of those 9 jurors was a registered Democrat. 9 out of 9.
No, drawing from Washington, D.C.
It's 93% in Washington
Yeah.
is registered debt. 93%.
And you couldn't move the trial. You have no right to do that.
No, because the action, the undercover filming was in the District of Columbia.
Understood.
And that's one of the problems with the system, right? Because most of our federal law is adjudicated in the district. So how can you possibly have
a fair trial?
And I was naive. I'm a little bit of an idealist. Thank God that I am. But I never anticipated how biased the jury was. I thought, no, this is about the First Amendment. This is about a breach of contract claim.
No, you're a bad guy.
But in the minds of a lot of people out there, they apply their Lady Justice is supposed to be blind. You're not supposed to know, the politics of the person. You're supposed to adjudicate on the law. And I believe that. But that's not how it works in the nation's capital. It's really about what political party you're perceived to be in. You know this, but I lived it, and it's quite a horrible experience. So we went through. I mean, again, I could write a book about the trial, but at the end of the day, what happened was we presented the case. Nothing was signed. So there's no NDA, and therefore there's no breach of duty. It goes to the jury. The jury comes out. And by the way, if you haven't lived through a federal jury trial that's issuing a verdict, your heart's beating, you're sweating. You just invested 6 years of your life and millions of dollars on principle.
That case had been ongoing, not the trial,
correct,
but from the start of when you made those videos until that point in court.
Veritas
6 years,
18 lawsuits at various points.
At
so
any time.
I go on with my life, but the lawyer's doing this. But
6 years.
But it's the principle of the matter. It's not a criminal case. It's the First Amendment. And the damages are quite nominal. I mean, it's not like this is $1 billion case. This is a relatively minor tortious interference case, but it's about the First Amendment.
Right. No, it doesn't matter how much you spent on this.
Correct.
Winning it is so
correct. So the jury comes out, and in the courtroom, what happens is the clerk of court says, "Has the jury reached a verdict?" And the foreperson, that is to say, the leader, the jury select, "We have, Your Honor," and hands a note to the judge. And then something unusual happened. The judge says, "I need everyone out of the courtroom." And the judge looks at us, and I can say this now because it was sealed, but now it's public information because the verdict has been reached. The judge, "We have a problem. The jury cannot agree on damages. The jury cannot agree that there are any damages. The instruction says if you can't agree, leave it blank." So my lawyer said, "Well, the instruction was clear. If they can't agree, they leave it blank. And if they can't agree, it's hung. It's a hung jury."
Right.
They can't agree.
Well, they may be able to agree on guilty or innocence, but they can't agree on the fine.
So in this case, they all agreed that it's technically not guilt. It's a judgment for the plaintiff on this misrepresentation business, on this breach of duty. And the jury all agreed that there indeed was a breach of duty. But they couldn't agree that there was any damage.
Wow.
So the judge, knowing this, quite an unusual situation, because they left it blank.
Yes.
He said, "Well, why don't you go back and try to make it work?" And my lawyer objected vehemently.
Right.
And the judge overruled them, and they went
Well,
back.
I think if they can go back and work the amount of penalty, they should be able to go back and review whether they still want to.
So after 7 hours of deliberating, 7 hours, the jury came back. And
this is the second time.
The first time was 7 hours. It was blank. The judge sends them back. And after, I think it was 15 or 19 minutes, they came back again. And it was blank again.
Right. Can't do it.
They're hung on damage. So nothing. And this time my lawyer was, and again, there's a transcript. We'll make a documentary out of this at some point. Jumping up and down. "Your Honor, the instruction is clear." And that judge, now that federal judge has a right, by the way, to issue any verdict he wants. It's called a directed verdict. He has a right to issue
the verdict,
a verdict.
but not the penalty. Or does he?
I don't know. But that judge has a right, I believe, as an Article III federal judge, to dismiss the case right there and then.
I see.
That happened to me last time. And frankly, he still may, under a Rule 50, post-verdict.
Oh, I see.
There's post-trial motions right now. He still may dismiss half of this because it's so absurd. But
if they can't agree on the penalty, then there was no crime.
Let me finish the story. The judge sends him in again. It's like, you could see the body language of the jurors that many of them were expressive. Like, are you kidding me? It appeared to me that some of them, there was no damages at all here. There was no money. And finally, they come back a third time, and they put a number down there, $120,000. So this 6-year-long case, it came down to 100, which is a very insignificant amount of money that they did. And
it's a fraction of the legal fees.
Oh God, the legal fees are a couple million. So we're appealing that to the D.C. Court of Appeal. Very confident that we're going to win, but the judge still has to rule on this directed verdict motion that we have in front of him, and he may overturn this case still, or half of it.
Doesn't sound likely.
We'll see. There was one moment in the case trial, this is an absolutely extraordinary thing. The federal judge compared Project Veritas to the Ku Klux Klan when he was saying, well, what if the Ku Klux Klan infiltrated the organization? Because, Dr. Bob, the case revolved around the fact they were arguing it was the infiltration itself, so to speak, the fact that we were able to get close to these people that caused their contractors and donors to leave them. It wasn't the words that came out of their mouth. Now, obviously, it was the words that came out of their mouth. It wasn't just the fact that we got close to them. It was an absurd argument they were making. But the judge, perhaps in trying...
Besides, they let you get close to them. I mean, wasn't it consensual?
It was completely consensual.
It was maybe at a bar, maybe at a restaurant.
Right. Scott Vogt was filmed in a bar in Wisconsin bragging about the fraud, bragging about the illicit things he was doing. And the words that came out of Fulva worked for Creamer. And the fact that Creamer was close with Fulva and that Fulva bragged, yes, I've worked with Creamer for 20 years. Now, Creamer didn't say these things, but it looked bad. It looked really bad. And under the law, I think that it'll be overturned because of just how self-evident it was, that it was the words that came out. But they were making the argument it was the infiltration itself. And the judge helping this argument said, well, I suppose if the Ku Klux Klan got close to you, that would be... And my lawyer goes, well, there's a difference, Your Honor. The Ku Klux Klan is a racist, violent, terrorist organization, and my client is a news media organization. So that gives you some idea of what we were dealing with.
It tells you where the judge was, right?
Perhaps. Although I still have to believe that judges don't like to be overturned on appeal. So maybe the judge will dismiss this out of his own self-interest. We'll see.
Okay, let's move on to some more current stories. Let's talk about elections. We're all aware of the issues today surrounding elections. Ballots being forged or discarded, dead people voting. But PV has discovered something quite new. In a recent memo that you've obtained from an FBI whistleblower, and the FBI itself calls that memo a cheat sheet. That's what they refer as a cheat sheet. The FBI has defined a new category of what it considers to be election crime. Tell us about that memo and tell us about that new category of activities that they are going to consider to be crimes now.
Yeah, this is one of a number of things that have been leaked to us by the people inside the FBI. So let me just take a step back because I think it's important to go over the totality of this. After the FBI raid, individuals came to us from the federal government that were upset about what happened to us, including one individual who I interviewed in the shadows. And this individual told me that there was political, the Department of Justice was engaged in political prosecutions and was become weaponized. This individual had other individuals that they were talking to. One of those individuals passed along a memo from FBI computer systems. And this was, again, remember how I told you earlier in this interview that the federal government, the U.S. attorneys, the prosecutors said I wasn't a journalist, yes. I wasn't news media?
Right, right.
Well, this internal computer document, I wouldn't call it classified, but it was certainly restricted, referred to Project Veritas as news media.
Ah, beautiful.
What an amazing development.
Beautiful.
We filed that with a federal judge and said, hello, you said in court that we weren't news media, but according to your internal computer systems, and that individual shared that. So what happened then was we got these different documents. It almost looks like it's written not by the FBI. And in one of these documents, we just released a story, I believe this week, it talks about misinformation. And it's like a cheat sheet. By the way, there's spelling errors in this document. That almost led me to believe it wasn't authentic, but then I was able to authenticate it. They're not setting their best at the Bureau. And they're talking about, they're going after people if they're engaged in misinformation. There are extremists that they look out for at the polls. And you have to be careful of extremists at polling locations. In another memo that was released in the last few months, if you have the Gadsden flag, that's the "Don't Tread on Me" flag,
Yes.
You are a violent extremist. Ted Cruz brought this up. If you're wearing certain cowboy boots. I mean, this is crazy stuff.
Basically, they're trying to identify conservatives or Republicans.
And most of these things are not extremists.
Right, but they are, because didn't Biden say, that we are filled with extremists? In a recent speech, he talked about that, where the background was black and red.
That was quite. That was like looked like
something
coloring
out of
Stalin or something like that.
Stalin, or
like
even
demonic,
the Third Reich.
Demonic coloring.
Right.
It was not the best
and the
coloring.
two guards in the background.
So
essentially, does the memo say something about misleading political information? Whoever generated that is an extremist or something like that?
Yes, it insinuates that. There's also another thing about the Betsy Ross flag. These are not extremist things. These are
historical things.
These are Americana things, and I think that based upon what this whistleblower told me. You think of the rank and file FBI. I asked him, what's going on? Is this everyone? And he said it was leadership mostly. Yeah. He said something that was extraordinary, Dr. Bob, which upset some people, and they didn't like the analogy, but I'm going to repeat what he said. He said, at the Bureau, when these agents are hired, and this may have been a decade or two ago when this person was hired, they take you to the Holocaust Museum. They take you to the Martin Luther King Museum. They remind you of the fine line that separates where we are from bad things, that history can turn on a dime. And he said, people are following their paycheck at the Bureau, and they're following their pension.
Right.
It's the pension and the paycheck. And they'll do anything to keep that pension, that paycheck. But then he goes, the paycheck and the pension lead to the Holocaust.
Yep, that's right. That's right.
This person is very brave.
And this is an FBI individual.
Still paid by the FBI.
Right. Wow.
And there are more like them out there.
Fantastic.
And as a result of this person coming forward in May of this year, I did the interview. I will be honest. The FBI raid chilled out a lot of our sources. They were scared, rightfully so, that by messaging me that they were going to get found out and found out by the FBI. But as a result of this brave person's taking this action, finally, some more federal whistleblowers have come to Project Veritas. We're still working on those stories, but one of those is quite big. And I can't tell you what agency or where they are, but came to us with information. I can't even talk about it yet, but we'll be breaking that story after the election. And very brave people, Dr. Bob, very brave, courageous souls that are willing to proverbially jump on a grenade and give up their career.
Giving up their career
for the public's right to know.
And they know there's a potential for being found, because anything they say is going to be documented someplace on a computer, and then the FBI, the politicized part of the FBI, will get subpoenas to look at those.
Yes. In fact, we have it on good authority that a wrong person was persecuted for having thought to have been the person that was the leaker to me. This is not the first time this has happened. In our investigative work, the powers that be go after the wrong source. They go after they're just desperate to find who done it, who leaked to James O'Keefe. And many commentators thought that the FBI raid itself was the reason for the raid was try to find out who my sources are.
Oh, wow.
And they were using some pretext, the diary. Give me a break. Do you really believe that if this diary belonged to anybody but Ashley Biden, the FBI would be involved
why
in it?
would the FBI be involved in the theft of a diary? Anybody's diary.
It's maybe
right.
A municipal infraction, or a state or a county infraction.
Well, you did bring it to the police, didn't you?
We brought it to, this is in Florida, in Delray, Florida. We brought it to the Delray police to make sure it was returned to its rightful owner, whoever that may
might
be.
be. Right.
I don't know who. I didn't even know if it was a.
Right.
I was almost certain it was Ashley's, but I wasn't 100% certain.
Well, I appreciate the fact that you set a high standard for the issues that you expose.
Well, imagine if it was a forgery.
Right. Right.
And then someone goes, "Aha, got you!
Yeah.
I set you up."
From then on.
And then people would say O'Keefe's a liar.
Right.
So we have to make sure. Listen, the difference between propaganda and journalism is the discipline of verification. We have to verify not only that what we're reporting is real, but that it's not just some person spouting some crap. It actually happened.
Another topic. You know, being transgender seems to be in these days. Tell us about your undercover recordings that you've made with Dr. Metzger, the pediatric endocrinologist.
Great question. This was a story we did last month. Again, whistleblower.
Yeah.
People close to them. Now that should give your audience hope.
Oh, this is good news. I was wondering how you got.
It wasn't an agent provocateur per Wikipedia. It wasn't. I didn't send someone. This was someone close to a doctor in Canada. Metzger is his name, and these are people that do this transgender surgery stuff, and they're doctors and they're experts in their field. And he makes this extraordinary admission on a Zoom call with his colleagues. It was a Zoom call recorded, and one of them betrayed the confidence of Metzger and sent it to us. And he sort of admits that children are having regrets and it may not be a good thing.
Not admits. I actually saw that recording just today, and he says children are having problems afterwards.
Yes. I forgot the quote.
Yeah.
Children are having problems. And he admits this, and you look at his body language in the tape, and he kind of shows some remorse. He feels bad.
Yeah.
But he's got that Orwellian double think going on, that self-justification. But, you know, it's good. It makes him feel
good. Happy.
Makes him happy in the moment.
That's what he said. He said, but it makes them happy. You're making a 12-year-old happy.
And it was this.
That's very important.
You got to watch it. It's you could see it in his eyes. He realizes this is not a good thing. So, of course, it's newsworthy when a doctor like that in British Columbia,
a senior,
one of the best
pediatric endocrinologist,
best in the world, admits this. And again, it was recorded by his colleague on the Zoom call and given to Project Veritas for publication.
Fantastic. We're just having second thoughts about that whole industry that has been sprouting out. It's a multi-billion-dollar industry now.
It seems like in all things, when people push too far over the precipice, and I'm not taking a position on these issues. I'm really not. I'm just exposing it. I don't take a position at all. I'm just revealing. But when people start talking about castrating children against their will at a very young age, it is upsetting even the people who are doing it.
And that gets on to the next video that you published. It was of Dr. Ellen Clayton, professor of pediatrics, and get this, co-founder of the Center for Biomedical Ethics at Vanderbilt Medical Center, who on tape threatens employees who don't want to be involved in transgender procedures. How did you get that tape?
Well, that came right after the one I just referenced. So right after we published the guy in British Columbia, it comes out that the Vanderbilt issues a memo. And as I recall, it was also a letter where they stopped doing these procedures. And we don't know if that was a direct result of our reporting, but that happened literally a day or two after the guy in British Columbia. So again, with the Vanderbilt case, it was like people are kind of pushing back against this now. They're a little concerned.
But she came out, she was on stage speaking to some group. You couldn't tell how big it was on this video. And basically saying, I don't care if your religion or your ethics are against this. If you're at Vanderbilt, you got to do it or else. Right. That's basically what she said.
Yes. And that's what she said. And that was provided by another whistleblower, Veritas tips at protonmail.com.
Perfect.
There's a lot of people out there. We got people everywhere.
Perfect.
People everywhere.
Perfect.
And it's very inspiring. It should inspire people.
Do something. That's what you say.
And these are people on their team.
Yeah. They're not on their team.
I shouldn't say team because that makes it seem like there's a fiefdom.
No.
I mean to say they're betraying the confidence of the person that works with them.
That's right.
Yeah. And because they have a conscience.
They have a conscience. Because they know that's more important than their loyalty to that particular leader.
As one of the whistleblowers told me, it's not that I'm betraying my employer. It's that my employer is betraying their own stated core values.
Right. There you go.
But it is a difficult thing, whistleblowing, because it does involve, I guess, a type of betrayal. It involves doing something so difficult, and that's why that's why Project Veritas is one of the only groups out there, and we have to be there for these people. We have to provide for them, and I know that you yourself have supported these people. So thank you, Dr. Bob, for believing in that.
And you know what? I suggest that Project Veritas, we've talked about this in the past, that you should have an annual gala. And at that gala, you should bring up some of these whistleblowers, if they're willing, and give them awards. I'd be happy to help provide funds for that.
Okay.
Okay, to reward them for their bravery, for what they've done for our society, by exposing criminal intent or criminals. And then there's another thing about this transgender. Last month, 3 organizations, the American Academy for Pediatrics, the American Medical Association, and the Children's Hospital Association, wrote to the U.S. Attorney General Merrick Garland, and they wrote to him they want to investigate people and organizations who expose the transgender surgery industry for its potential harm for children.
Wow.
They want the government to step in and to investigate and prosecute people who are exposing the potential harm and danger of transgender
Well, I guess
surgery.
Attorney General Merrick Garland will have to investigate Metzger for saying on his Zoom call that there may be problems.
Right.
This is obviously so absurd, right? I mean, you get my point. That when Veritas exposes the lips moving of the practitioners, then maybe the Attorney General needs to investigate the practitioners. It's really twisted. It's so absurd.
It seems that in the future, the FBI may be arresting journalists and doctors who are discussing the negatives of these procedures. And of course, every procedure has negatives, but why should you only prosecute doctors and journalists who are talking about the negatives of transgender surgery, which are real?
And that's why, I mean, to bring it full circle back to what we talked about in the beginning of this program, I think that people are maybe realizing that's not the world they want to live in. And the only reason they're realizing that, because I have to get people to actually have consensus. I can't just be preaching to the choir. I don't believe in preaching to the choir. I want people to be persuaded. And you might think I'm a dreamer, but the reason why I'm not just a dreamer is the ACLU is defending me. You know why? Because they don't want to live in a world where FBI agents point guns at their head.
Right.
So they go, whoa. So here's the point. There needs to be a détente in this country, or a truce. You can't have it like Brazil. Well, there's a Brazilian election a couple days from this filming. There is too much at stake. Like the president, Bolsonaro, like he's probably going to go to jail if he loses, because in these countries, whoever's in power incarcerates the other team.
Right. Prosecutes.
That's not America.
Right.
We can't have, so there needs to be a détente. There needs to be a truce to say, I don't want to live in that world, and you don't want to live in that world. And what the Department of Justice...
And it's happening in this world, if you recall, or if you saw it, only a few days ago at this huge political meeting in China. The Premier Xi was sitting next to the former president. He had the former president forcibly removed. The former president forcibly removed from that meeting for something that he had said, that he's not quite in agreement with Xi Jinping.
That's the sort of thing that's the sort of world that we have to decide as Americans if we want to live in that world.
Can you imagine that?
I will, because I was forcibly put in handcuffs and thrown against the wall and had my reporter's notebooks taken from me. I know what it feels like, and it's terrifying. And it's more terrifying when you're innocent, because when you're innocent, your mind. See, if I did something wrong, I go, well, they got me. But by the way, they've had my stuff for 2 years. And if they had something on me, it would have leaked to the New York Times. Something did indeed leak to the New York Times. It was like an attorney-client privilege document showing the guidance to my reporters about how not to break the law. It made me look good. That's all they got on me. There's nothing in there. I don't break the law. But when you're in handcuffs and they're doing that to you, you know what your mind starts thinking? And this is going to sound horrible. I thought, are these guys putting like cocaine in my underwear drawer? Are these guys putting porn on my phone?
That's the next step.
That's the fear.
Right.
That's the fear.
That's right.
And then your brain goes. Your brain goes to places you don't want to go, and you become paralyzed with fear. And I haven't read as much as others, but I've read history, And when you read history, it scares the crap out of you because you think, are human beings that evil? Are they willing to do that stuff in this country? Where there's an American flag at the Department of Justice, they pledge an oath?
There are people willing to do that,
and
quite clearly.
And when you live through it, it changes you. I mean, I'm still an idealist. I still believe in e pluribus unum and equality before the law because those are creeds. Those are things to aspire to. But when you live through evil, when evil things happen, yeah, it's a little harder to sleep at night. It's tough knowing there's evil in the world.
These are people who believe the end justifies the means. And I don't think, for example, you look at the rise of Nazism in Germany, right? I don't believe Germans are any different than Americans. It's just that they had a leader who led them down a particular path. And we could have that same thing happening in this country.
It makes the actions of like the White Rose Society and Bonhoeffer and these sort of martyrs like Bonhoeffer, it makes them all the more heroic.
That's right.
Because they stood up. And you think, and I think, well, if I was the guy in Germany,
sure.
I would have stood.
No,
well, yeah.
Maybe not.
I mean, maybe
not.
not. But some people did. But some people gave up their life, right?
Mm-hmm.
And those are the people that I think we have to find. And we're not there yet, but
You're one of them. You are one of them.
Well, thank you.
Another hot topic in public schools going woke. Just last month, you published 2 videos taken at the Will Rogers Public School in, I think it was Tulsa, Oklahoma. Mm-hmm. One featured a lady, Nicolette Dennis, the principal, and the other featured a self-described anarchist who's a teacher, Tyler Wynn, an 8th grade English teacher. He is on record saying, quote, "Trust me, I want to burn down the entire system," end of quote. And another quote, quote, "Eventually you want to remove Christianity or religion from progressive thought." What's the story about this, and has there been any action to remove this teacher?
Okay, so we've done, since September of this year, we did 3 or 4 stories on schools. In Connecticut, they put the principal on paid leave for saying he doesn't hire Christians and Catholics and people over the age of 30. In New York, they fired the woman, the director of student activities, who said these white boys in my class are a problem. And this is a TikTok Tyler, we like to refer to in Project Veritas. So he had done this TikTok video of himself some time ago saying, "F your parents, I'm your parent now." We tracked him. He left that school in Oklahoma, and he went to a different school. We tracked down Tyler and spoke to him again.
Good going.
Our undercover journalist found him teaching at a school some 11 miles away from the first school. Yeah. This is the now Will Rogers School. And we interviewed him covertly at a restaurant, and he admitted, "I want to burn the system down. I'm an anarchist," and all of these things.
Just what you want to teach your 8th grade kid.
Correct. Student. Now, in Tyler's case, as far as we know, he has not yet been fired, but the Secretary of Education in Oklahoma got involved, made a video about it, was looking into the matter. The principal of the school, Will Rogers, was very woke, and this is hilarious. The principal gathered all the people in the auditorium, and there's a video.
Not the students.
I believe all the faculty.
Yeah, faculty.
We don't know because it's audio only.
Okay.
But they gathered all the people in the auditorium, and this principal this is on YouTube. I don't know if you have the clip, but she goes, and I'm going to imitate her. "Oh, please, Project Veritas, don't record me.
Don't videotape me, please. Don't like put this on social media. Don't make me feel like Project Veritas is with us."
Don't be. She's upset, and she's worried that someone in her faculty is Project Veritas, and she was being recorded by one of her faculty, and they linked it to me. So this was not my source. This was a news source. Yeah. So my point is that everywhere in this country, millions of people are the Project Veritas Invisible Army.
Great.
They recorded the principal yammering on about me. And this principal was woke and just as probably as extreme radical as Tyler.
Yeah.
And was defending him. And I think Trump, Dr. Rob, I was in public school in the 90s. I graduated high school in 2002. No one ever got political in my classrooms.
No, I understand.
And I'm 38, but I believe, and some of my employees are in their mid to late 20s, and even they tell me in the suburbs of New York, no one got political. But I think it was Donald Trump that rubbed these people raw. And since 2016, 2017, that's when things seem to really reach a boiling point in our public schools where teachers are now doing this.
You've also done quite a bit of work, undercover work, where you uncovered, I think, self-dealing between the FDA and drug companies. In the recent video that I saw, an FDA official says, and I'm quoting here, almost $1 billion a year goes into the FDA budget, comes from pharmaceutical companies. Now, there's a clear conflict of interest. I thought that the FDA government agencies are funded by the government. But according to this individual, they get billions of dollars a year directly from drug companies to support their investigation of drugs.
That's right.
Now, how can they honestly and even-handedly investigate drugs that are made by these drug companies if they're getting paid by the drug companies?
Well, that's a great rhetorical question. Similar to your question, how can a journalist have a fiduciary duty to a subject he investigates? These are profoundly rhetorical questions because there is no answer to that, which is why the investigative expose was so devastating. This was a guy named Christopher Cole at the Food and Drug Administration admitting the flow of money from pharmaceutical companies into the FDA. And I believe, and again, my memory, I don't have the transcript in front of me, but I'm going to paraphrase him. He was also talking about a vaccine for young children, I believe 5 years old. And he says it's all but approved. In other words, he admitted the rubber stamping of this vaccine.
Right.
And I can't,
which he then goes on to talk about how much revenue that approval of the vaccine to young people will turn into revenue for the drug companies.
Correct. That was in the winter of this past year. And again, I'm sitting here, I want to make it clear that nothing I'm about to say is for or against. I'm not going to take a position because I don't believe in that. I believe in quoting them. This is what they're saying.
That's their position. Right.
I'm talking about the FDA and Pfizer.
Right.
This is coming on the heels, Dr. Bob, of 3 investigations we did into Pfizer. Vanessa Gelman, a senior director at Pfizer, we got her emails. And she says in the emails that she's lying to her customers about what's in the vaccine. Again, this is Pfizer now, not me. Pfizer. Another guy. I forgot his name. We recorded him, a scientist for Pfizer, PhD, biochemistry. And he says that this is a Pfizer scientist. I'm quoting a Pfizer scientist just so for the censors out there. He goes, your antibodies are stronger than our own vaccine. PhD, biochemistry, Pfizer Pharmaceutical. And what happens? I get banned from Twitter. I get censored on Instagram. You can't tag James O'Keefe because he's promoting disinformation. Well, then I guess the PhD in biochemistry from Pfizer is promoting disinformation. And again, I'm not taking a position.
You're just reporting on it.
It's my obligation as an investigative reporter to tell people what the public must know. And by the way, what's his employment status? And Pfizer is a very powerful company. So then, again, you can't make this stuff up. Truth is stranger than fiction. Tom Fitton at Judicial Watch, you know who he is?
Sure.
Tom Fitton gives me a call. And he goes, this happened, I believe, since I last saw you. He goes, James, you're not going to believe this. I said, what? I said, we submitted a FOIA request, the Department of Justice, to find out if there were any communications between Pfizer and the FBI. And there have been some. Ooh. And they got this letter from the Department of Justice that identified records that Pfizer was talking to the FBI about me. Now, what business does Pfizer have with the FBI about me?
Right.
So this is the most.
They want to shut you up.
These are the most powerful companies in the world.
Right. They're in cahoots with the government and against the truth.
And I mean, people say, well, O'Keefe, you're a right-wing activist. Okay, is Pfizer left-wing? Is the FBI left-wing? Is CNN left-wing? Is the New York Times left-wing? Our tech? I mean, when did that happen? This is not about ideology anymore. It's about power. You talk about money coming from pharmaceutical companies to the FDA, to government agencies. Who's reporting on this?
And what about Fauci and many other administration officials who hold stock in those companies?
That's even crazier. And Fauci, another story we did on Fauci since I saw you was this business about the Wuhan approvals. A source came to us from the Pentagon the Pentagon, and leaked us a document about gain of function research,
right.
and this
which evidently the U.S. paid. It wasn't hundreds of millions, but it was millions of dollars into Wuhan.
Well, according to this source, they gave us a document showing a Marine working at DARPA, a division of the Department of Defense, that Fauci pushed gain of function research despite the Defense Department's objections to it. This is a letter.
Despite that it's illegal in the United States, which is why I think that Fauci was funding it in China. It's against the law to perform that kind of
and we
DNA
published
work
this
in the
story,
US.
and Fauci was called to testify and mentioned Project. I'm going to imitate him. Project Veritas under oath, being mentioned by name by Fauci was quite surreal. But there's a greater issue, Dr. Bob, which is broader. It's that Veritas is doing investigative reporting, which is different than what the quote-unquote journalists are doing at these publications like the Washington Post. What they do is give you the company line.
Regurgitate.
They give you the company line, and the company line is not.
It's not
that's
factual.
That's not truth. It's not. It's
not always factual.
What they tell you, but it's what they tell you on the record.
Right.
And sometimes people are more honest when an investigative reporting is publishing what they don't want published. And it's kind of become this world where the means of distribution on these tech companies, they don't want the unsanctioned information published. They only want sanctioned, which leads us to present day. Elon Musk taking over Twitter in the last 36 hours. Project Veritas Instagram this week, now you can tag us again. So it looks like that these tech companies are going in a more freedom of speech direction.
Well, I wouldn't say these tech companies. I would say because of the Elon Musk, Twitter is going in the right direction. We don't know about the rest.
And Zuckerberg's stock has tanked 20% in the last 2 days with Meta and his vision being questioned. Their stock is tanking too. So and Zuckerberg owns Instagram. So we'll see what happens, and we'll see if Project Veritas gets reinstated on Twitter as a result of Elon Musk. As I sit here right now, as of this recording, Project Veritas is trending on Twitter, with everyone wondering if Elon Musk lets us back on.
Perfect. My bet is that he will. Well, it's been a very busy year. Anything else you want to tell us about before we close?
I think the school stories are probably the most impactful stories that we've done this year, and here's why. I think that we're very divided in this country. We disagree on many things, although the election's next week, and people seem to be quite united on gas prices and inflation. It seems like
and crime,
and it seems like people are united around those issues. But there's another issue everyone's united around: their children. Whatever your politics are, you care about your children. And I think that the stories that we've done showing these teachers and principals admitting to, in some cases, abusing children or indoctrinating them or doing or saying horrible things or not hiring someone because of their religion, that's crazy. These things have strangely brought people together. In fact, the story in Connecticut we did, Richard Blumenthal, U.S. Senator, no fan of mine, was forced to admonish what we exposed. The Attorney General of Connecticut, no fan of mine, was forced to launch a civil rights inquiry after this guy said we don't hire Catholics. So my point is that I think some of the education stories are some of the most powerful exposés we've done. And stay tuned, because we have a lot more coming out.
Well, looks like there might be another episode with James O'Keefe. Well, in the early 1900s, President Theodore Roosevelt coined the term muckrakers for those reform-minded journalists who search for and try to expose corruption, scandal, or wrongdoing, especially in politics. In a speech in 1906, he said, quote, "Now it is very necessary that we should not flinch from seeing what is vile and debasing. There is filth on the floor, and it must be scraped up with the muck rake. And there are times and places where this service is the most needed of all the services that can be performed." Thank you, James, for spending time with me today. And thank you much, much more for the extremely valuable and sometimes dangerous work that you do to make America a better place for all of us by uncovering the wrongdoings, the muck that is hidden from our view.
Thank you.
You know, I first learned about Project Veritas back in 2011, 11 years ago when it first began. I donated $1,000 at that time, and every year since then, I've increased my level of support. Why? Because of PV's increased efforts and successes in exposing wrongdoings in our society. If you also appreciate the work of Project Veritas, I urge you to go to their website, www.projectveritas.com, all one word, and make a donation too. Finally, if you enjoyed this episode, please subscribe and you'll be notified each time a new episode is posted.
Thanks so much for listening to another episode of Life Lessons with Dr. Bob. If you enjoyed these interviews with some of today's most influential thought leaders, please follow and rate the show on your favorite podcast platform. And don't forget, you can also watch each episode on YouTube as well. We'll see you next time.